Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Canyon Professional Development. This is a presentation on balance and boundaries, how to avoid burnout. My name is Dr. Mike McCabe, and some information about myself. I am an online full-time faculty member here at Grand Canyon University in the College of Education. I am a certified elementary school teacher. I taught both 4th and 6th grades and was also a middle school counselor in the Cartwright School District for 9 years. I have a total combined years of 18 years in education, and I am married to Dr. Crystal McCabe, who's also at Grand Canyon University, and we have 2 sons, one that is just entered into high school, and one is in his last year of elementary school. All right. So our objectives for the presentation today are we're going to be covering what are boundaries, why are boundaries important, burnout and avoiding burnout, and balance. So our icebreaker is something that you can pause the video and reflect on in your own time. It is on a digital platform, an educational tool called Mentimeter. And it's what do boundaries mean to you? When I say the word boundaries, what do you think of? Are there any words that come to mind? Are there any thoughts about boundaries? So what you would do is you would scan the QR code that is on your screen, and you can upload what boundaries mean to you. Now you can choose to submit them if you want, but you don't have to. It's just a reflection time. What I will show you on the next screen is how the results of this come into play. So from previous presentations, boundaries, what comes to mind? These are the words, the adjectives, the ways to describe boundaries that people have thought of in regards to what do they mean. So you see limitations, space, respect, protection, expectations. You'll see some things repeat, self-care, understanding, safety. These are all adjectives that could describe what boundaries actually are and what they mean to you. Now, with Mentimeter, just a way to use it in your classroom if you do choose to use it, it is a way that you can create word bubbles, you can use quizzes, you can use them to promote engagement, you can do check for understandings, etc. But for this activity, this is for the word cloud, and this was a previous one that was used in another presentation. But all these words that describe boundaries, these are things that we are going to cover and talk about and think about when we're going over this presentation today. So you can kind of see how previous participants have thought about boundaries. At your own time, you can pause the video and you can watch the introductory video on boundaries. There's a QR code where you can link directly to it, or the link is there for you to copy and paste into your browser to watch. Setting healthy boundaries is very important. So as you watch the video, you can reflect upon why would setting healthy boundaries be important to you as an individual, as a professional, as an educator, and how would they come into play as you are navigating your personal life, your professional life? What kind of things would constitute a healthy boundary? Some things to think about and set your mindset and frame of reference as you're watching the video. So what are boundaries? Boundaries typically fall into 4 different categories. So the first is emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries are those that protect our own emotional well-being, those ones that we keep ourselves emotionally safe. Physical boundaries. How can we protect our physical space? That could be personally your home, your car, personal belongings such as maybe your purse or your wallet. Um, Also, physical space could be your classroom. If you're in an office, your office, your cubicle, if you work in a large corporate setting. Those are all physical spaces that you have boundaries for. The next is workplace boundaries. It's a little bit different because I did talk about your workspace. This is your workplace. Protecting our ability to do our work without interference or drama. What does that mean? So when you go to work, you are expected to do a job. That's what you're getting paid to do. So how can you do your work without interferences or drama? How do you set those boundaries? And then time, your use of time, or you could say your misuse of time. How do you apply time as a boundary? Just some things to think about. We'll go over those more in detail here in just a moment. So the first are those emotional boundaries. Emotional boundaries does include time as well. So in this case, if you don't have time to do something, or it's not in your capacity to have the time to do it or make the time to do it, don't overcommit yourself. If you overcommit yourself to the things that you don't want to do, or maybe you don't have to do, you're going to expend yourself into a area of exhaustion. So you need to know emotionally where you're at and what you are capable of doing, what is your capacity and what are your limits. And time is one of those that is tied to your emotional boundaries. Those things that if you don't have time to do it, even though it might please somebody else, maybe you just don't have the time to do it. If you overcommit, something else is going to get put on the back burner, or something else is going to not take preference or precedence over the other if you're overcommitting your time. The second is personal. Don't accept or agree to things or behaviors that don't respect you. You are a person, you are to be valued. So your personal boundaries, your emotional boundary that is tied to that, if people do not treat you fairly, or if people do not respect you as a person, don't overcommit emotionally to those situations, because as we talk about later on in this presentation, that can be a factor that leads to a certain type of burnout. And then relationships. This could be personal, this could be professional, or this could be intimate with partner. If you let others be disrespectful to you or treat you poorly, your relationships are going to be in an unhealthy emotional place. So don't let yourself be manipulated. Try to stick with people who are going to respect you and value you, your time, respect you as a person. And if it's a personal relationship like friends, don't let your friends mistreat you, manipulate you. If it's with a partner, you don't want to be with someone who puts you down or says negative things about you or makes you feel bad about yourself. So this is just some things to think about on the emotional side of boundaries. Then this comes to the physical boundaries. We have a little gift here off to the side. Boundaries are like, with the physical boundaries are where you draw the line in the sand. So these include body and touch. If you do not like being touched, like people coming up to you, touching your shoulder or hugging you or whatever, you need to let those things be known to that person, because maybe they're a touchy-feely person. Maybe they're overly excited to see you, or maybe they are just one of those that really doesn't have a personal space bubble, that their bubble is very large. So if it makes you uncomfortable, you need to speak up and say something, because physical boundaries of touch, and you as your physical being, your body, are things that you need to make sure that people respect. Personal space. So personal space, and we'll talk about this more in just a little bit here, but like you have a bubble, and that's how close you let people be. So if you're in an office setting and you have your own desk area or your own cubicle or whatever, and you don't want people like standing behind you over your shoulder or sitting right next to you at your desk, you need to set those limitations. And COVID really played into that a lot, where some people are now okay with just a high five or a wave or a fist bump instead of a hug or a handshake. Those physical personal space boundaries have kind of been redefined by people with the times of COVID, and what they're comfortable with. And you need to be okay with that. If somebody doesn't want to be touched, or they don't want you in their bubble, you need to respect that. But on the other hand, you need to verbalize and communicate what your personal boundaries are to that person, so that they know and they're aware and can respect that. Physical boundaries is that workspace, like I said already, your office, your desk, your classroom, where you have your pictures on your desk, or a shelf, or wherever it might be in your workspace. If you have a home office, if you're working from home, maybe that's your place where work happens, and you have your limitations of what's able to be in that office, or who comes into the office, or whatever that might be. Your home is a very important place for sanctuary. It's a place where you typically feel safe, have your valuables there, which goes into the next bullet. So you want it to be protected. So people install alarm systems, Ring or Nest cameras that alert when people are there, or ways that packages are delivered. So your home is an area where you have a physical boundary and you want it to be respected. So some people have locations in their home where they're off limits, or if somebody comes over, maybe it's okay if they're hanging out in your living room, but you really don't want them using your master bathroom or going into your bedroom or wherever it might be. If you live in an apartment, areas that people are okay to be in, you need to set those physical boundaries of what's okay, what's acceptable, and locations that are acceptable and what people are able to access. So as we talk about those emotional and physical boundaries, there's a lot more that we're going to talk about. But why are these emotional and physical boundaries important? Take a moment, pause the video, reflect on why are emotional and physical boundaries important? And is there a physical and or emotional boundary that you may not have previously considered that you might want to start thinking about? It doesn't mean you have to be very strict and rigid about it right now, but it's something to think about. If it's a time commitment, or a personal space, or a bubble, or a boundary, or whatever it might be, emotional boundary, something that maybe you haven't considered before that you might want to think about. Maybe I've been a little lax in that area, or maybe I should set up a boundary for that, or maybe I've not been respecting other people's emotional or physical boundaries, or maybe people aren't respecting mine. How can I evaluate that? How can I address that? So if you are in an area, if you are doing this with a partner, and other people are around you, this is more where you could engage in this activity. If not, you can just think about it and kind of evaluate where you're at. But if you are in an area where you do have people where you could test this activity out if there's somebody else with you, this is where the physical boundary comes into play. And the activity is, what's your bubble? When I taught sixth grade, my classroom was set up. We had 4 or 5 desks together, and they had group work and students work together. For 1 year, I taught fourth grade. I thought, oh, this is the gem of education, and I'm going to teach fourth grade, and it's going to be wonderful, sunshine and rainbows, and everything's going to be great. Well, I learned that I didn't have as big of a bubble as I thought I did. And that started when we had the carpet time where students would come up and we would do reading activities. So in the front of the class, my classroom, we had a rocking chair that I sat in, and then there was the carpet, you know, the ones that have the red and the green and the blue and the purple squares, and everybody sat on their square. I didn't set up the physical boundary very well. When we did, I said, okay, let's come over to the carpet. We're going to do an activity. The students came up, and instead of saying everybody sit on one of these little squares, they started to sit where they were like sitting on top of my feet. And I had to pause and reflect on my own boundary and say, oh, okay, you know what? Maybe this is too close. So I had to say, okay, everybody's who is here in the front. I didn't say those are sitting on my feet, because they were sitting on my feet, but those that are right here up in the front, we're gonna scooch back like 2 movements. So everybody take their time, scooch back 2, and then find your own spot on the carpet. It worked out from that point, but I realized that there is a physical boundary that I had, and I call it the bubble. And my bubble is probably about as far as I can extend my hand. So if you are with a partner, what I want you to do is I want one of you to stand on one side of the location where you're at, and the other to stand maybe 10 feet away and face each other. Now you want to ask permission so that the other person can approach you. So one person is going to stand, and the other is going to ask, may I approach you? Now, what you're going to do is you're going to walk, the one person is going to walk towards the other person. And once that person is too close to you, you can put your hand up and you can say, okay, stop. That is where your physical boundary is. That's where you're comfortable with people being around you. Now, if you're the person walking towards the other person, maybe you're not comfortable being that close to another person. So you need to recognize your own physical boundaries. So this is an exercise in knowing where your bubble is, how close your physical boundary is to other people. I've had it where people are like almost nose to nose with me, but I do give the signal. If they get within arm's reach, I usually say stop there. But some people are okay with that, and some people can get really close to another person and be all right. Like I said, COVID did change some of these bubbles that people have and physical boundaries that people have. So if you are okay with people being that close, then you can test that activity out. But some people are not. But always do ask if you're trying this activity with a partner in a group, if it's okay to approach that other person, because they may not feel comfortable with it. If you're not okay with it, then just kind of reflect on this activity and just know, maybe when you're in your classroom or you're out shopping or you're around other people, what's your boundary and what are you okay with? Some people are okay being close. Some people may not be okay being that close. But it also depends on the situation as well. So if you are around strangers, maybe you're like, you might want to stay back a little bit. Or if you're with family, you might be okay with them being a little closer. It's all just a way to gauge where you're at with your physical boundaries and what you're comfortable and not comfortable with. Okay, so We see this leads into my next part here on workplace boundaries. If you've ever seen the show that is on the screen here, you'll know that Ted and Alexis, Alexis doesn't have a lot of boundaries of where she she finds herself. Ted has a little bit more, and you'll see in the little gift there where he's showing where his bubble is, and Alexis is poking where her bubble is a little bit maybe more expanded than his. Okay, so workplace boundaries do include the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual, the workload priority, time, and communication. So physical boundaries. We've already talked about those. How close are you okay to people being around you in your physical workspace, whether that be your desk if you're a teacher, if you are working in an office setting around your office or your cubicle, and what's okay to be touched and what's okay, what maybe you don't want touched. Maybe you don't want people taking your stapler. Maybe you don't want your property to be community property where everybody feels that they can take your pens or your highlighters or your scissors or your tape or whatever that might be. Your emotional and your intellectual boundaries in the workplace. So that is what your opinions are and how you share them, and your thoughts and how they are to be respected. So people may not agree with what you say. There's a way to engage with coworkers, there's a way to engage with students, there's a way to engage with administration or your bosses or higher ups or whatever, where you can feel valued, but also communicate your needs, communicate your thoughts, feelings, but in a way that's appropriate for the workplace. If you tell off your boss or you are using inappropriate language in the classroom, that's probably not going to go over well. You need to think about how to intellectually frame your thoughts and the way you have communication in the workplace. The next one is your workload and the priority of what your workload is. So when you are an educator, you're teaching 6 classes a day or whatever it might be. How do you prioritize your workload? Okay, you have to teach those classes. What is the priority of how you prepare for those classes? If for example, when I was a school counselor, I was meeting with students all the time, but I also had other responsibilities. So I was doing playground duty, and I was doing hallway sweeps and things like that. So I had to make sure that I knew my schedule, I knew what I needed to prioritize, and commitments, appointments with students, etc. So I could prioritize what my workload is. There's things that have to be done, and there's things that maybe you can put off for later, or things that may need to be expedited or addressed. If a parent reaches out to you and asks for you to email them or call them back, you may need to do that within 24 hours or whatever that might be. Time is an important workplace boundary because you need to know what kind of time you're dealing with. We're not unlimited, unfortunately. We're not unlimited with our time during the day. There are still only 24 hours during a day, and typical work times of about 8 hours, factor in lunch, things like that. If you're in the classroom, you might have a certain amount of time per class period. So it's something that you have to consider. How much time do you actually have to teach a lesson? What do you need to cover? How do you need to prioritize your time? How do you need to map out your lesson in order to fit everything in? So that is another workplace boundary that maybe some people don't consider, but it is an important workplace boundary. And then last but not least, communication. I talked about this just briefly with the emotional intellectual. Communication also is the professional tone that you have in your communications with your students, with other faculty members, with other teachers, the way you communicate with parents, how you communicate with parents. Do you have different ways that you communicate with them? Is it through email, or maybe you have Remind, or you have Google Classroom where they're able to access, or maybe Class Dojo, something like that. Having boundaries of that. And I know that me personally, when I came into the role of a online full-time faculty for GCU, time, communication were all one of those things where I set up reminds so that the students could communicate with me if they had a question. But I also had to set a limit with that so that I'm not responding to a student at 10 o'clock at night and then they know, oh, Dr. Mike is available to talk at 10 o'clock at night, so I'm going to ask him 50,000 questions about our assignment that's due tomorrow. So setting up those boundaries of how you communicate, when you communicate, and the importance of the communication. All right, so this does play into our next part where it's time boundaries. One, we talked about the time management already. These play hand in hand. The time management, like I said, there is, as the clock shows here, we only have a certain amount of time, and you don't want to be spending all of your time doing tasks that maybe could be prioritized, which is our next bullet, in a different way. If you need to have copying done, or you need to have things prepped and set out for your next lesson, the next class that you have coming in, or the next day, prioritize, okay, what do I need to have for ELA? Maybe that's the first hour of your day, or math, or whatever it might be. Prioritizing your time so that you're not spending all your time doing other things. The next is scheduling your day. So there are non-negotiable needs. Like, there are things that contractually you may be committed to do, or you have to do. So those are the non-negotiables, the things that you can't really bend on. Others, scheduling your day might be a little different. Maybe you have some flexibility with your prep time, but also we know as teachers, sometimes we can be asked to do other activities, which may mean covering classes or doing lunch duty or things like that. So you need to know what are some of the negotiables and what are the non-negotiable things that you can flex on, and some of the things that you may not be able to do. And then that comes into play with the accountability, holding yourself accountable to your time. If your ELA lesson is supposed to go for an hour and it goes for an hour and a half, maybe you need to reflect on managing your time a little bit better with presenting that lesson. Or if it goes over 5 minutes or so, just knowing that maybe you don't have that much time for social studies and you got to kind of flex your time a little bit for the remainder of the week so that you still get in your instructional time, but also cover your content. Next one is very important, and it's something that a lot of us have trouble doing: resting, taking time off, and actually shutting off. Rest. I know it's easier said than done, but they say at least 6 to 8 hours a night of sleep. I know the last 2 nights, it's hard to do with kids starting school and things like that need to be done, but these are difficult things to, you got to fit everything into the schedule and also rest. So trying to fit in those 6 to 8 hours every night so that you are rested, your mind is rested, and you are rejuvenated for the next day. Taking time off. This is one where people also have a little bit of difficulty. If you have time off, that time off is yours. If you have a certain amount of PTO hours, or you have a certain amount of vacation time, take that vacation time, use your PTO. You don't want to find yourself getting in a place where I'm that person that never takes time off, and I'm so proud of that. You're probably spreading yourself out to leading yourself towards maybe down the road being burnt out, and that's the next part of our presentation. So use your time off. It's yours. Take the time, relax, enjoy yourself. Um, use your time off. And then the last one is shutting off. Now, shutting off is closing down for the day and being done. I know as educators, that's easier said than done. Myself, being in the online world of education with higher education learners at the college level, they have questions a lot. I try to front load those questions and answer everything in my videos that I create for the students, or my messages or my announcements or things like that, to try to avoid a lot of some of those additional questions. But you're going to have those students that maybe didn't read the announcement or didn't watch my video or whatever, and they have questions, and maybe you sent them a message and, oh, I really need to check to see if they responded to my message, or did they submit their assignment? I really need them to submit their assignment. The class is closing. Actually shutting off, close your computer, log off, walk away from it. Don't come back and check it because you have 5 free minutes. Shut off when it's time to shut off, and manage that time. This is a video that goes back and reviews physical boundaries, but I think it's very well done. It's very short, so if you do have time to view the video, you can scan that QR code or type in the link. It goes back to personal boundaries and the physical boundaries. So I think it's all about taking care of yourself and finding self-worth, and knowing that you and your time are valuable, and that you want to maximize your time, but also respect yourself as a person, because your emotions, your personal boundaries, your physical boundaries, those are all important. They all play into each other to make a healthier you. So if you do get a chance, pause, watch the video, and kind of reflect on those personal and physical boundaries and how they really relate to you as a person. So why are boundaries so important? If you don't set boundaries, people aren't going to follow them. So if you don't have personal boundaries for yourself, people are not going to respect them. They're not going to follow those boundaries, and don't expect them to follow them. Setting boundaries is all about having a healthy connection or interaction with other people. If you don't like being touched, communicate that. If you don't like people in your physical space, communicate that. If you feel like you're being manipulated, address that. Things we've talked about so far in this presentation. And allow people to know what your boundaries are. If you want your boundaries to be respected, you need to communicate them. If you don't set them, they're not going to be followed. If you don't communicate them, you're not going to have boundaries that you can set for yourself, and people may take advantage of that. So leading into this next part here, this little infographic here at the bottom says, high achieving, selfless people plus the demands of the profession equal burnout plus resentment plus stress. So just think about that as we're moving into this next section of the presentation. If you're have a lot of demands put on you, if you're a selfless person, that can lead to some stress, some resentment, and maybe ultimately burnout. So the takeaway and reflection from this section, pause the video and think about these 2 questions here. So how do you currently use workplace or time boundaries in your personal and professional life? Are there any that you haven't considered that you could use in the near future? Are there any that maybe you think you could work on and think you could do better on? or things that maybe, like I said, you haven't considered before that maybe you would want to start thinking about. Okay, we are back with our next section. This section is on burnout. As you can see, big and red bolded font in the middle of this infographic here. Now, I kind of like this image here because what is burnout? It's all the other adjectives and words that are around burnout: stress, depression, behavior, exhaustion, failure, tiredness, unhappy, crisis, failure, frustration, emotions, nervousness. All of those adjectives describe burnout. And burnout is a big issue. It is something that workplaces are facing with their employees. It's something that employees are facing. And it's something that I felt so strongly about that I actually spent 7 years of my life writing a dissertation about it. So it is very important to consider in the workplace. So let's dive into this a little more. There's a quote here, and I think this is a good way to introduce this section. So it says, burnout is the result of too much energy output and not enough energy self-invested. In other words, it's burning too much fuel that you've put in your tank. So think about it like a car. If it doesn't have enough gas, it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to be stranded. And if you don't have enough power or energy output, physically, emotionally, you're going to run out of steam, or you're going to run out of gas as well. And then you're going to be stranded and stuck. That's a good way to think about burnout. So what is burnout? So burnout is emotional exhaustion, mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion, and it's caused by repeated or long-term stress in the workplace. A lot of people associate burnout with just I'm so tired, I've got all these things to do at home, and I'm really busy, I'm so burnout. Burnout is actually a workplace phenomenon. And this infographic here says 55% of educators say they plan to leave education sooner than planned because of the pandemic. And that was in January of 2022. 55% plan to leave the profession. Are they experiencing emotional, mental, physical exhaustion? Is there repeated or long-term stress caused by problems at work? I would say probably. There's causality there to say that could be true. This video, if you do have time to watch it, is an introduction to burnout. And if you scan the QR code, you'll be able to watch it. It is a very good overarching overview of burnout and what it is and what it isn't. The World Health Organization does recognize burnout as an occupational phenomenon where you can be diagnosed with burnout, with exhaustion, all those that we talked about in the previous slide, the mental exhaustion, physical, emotional exhaustion from being burnout from your workplace. So there are ways to avoid burnout. As you watched the video, you got introduced to a couple of the topics and areas that burnout does address. So this picture here, I think, is a good representation of signs of burnout. This person is experiencing headaches and muscle tension, trouble with sleep patterns, feeling overwhelmed, cynical, that is a big one, frustration, unfulfilled by your job, irritable at your job, losing your temper, feeling depleted after work, like you've got nothing left to give, a sense of apathy, just you don't care anymore, you could care less, over complaining, the Sunday night blues before work. Like Sunday night comes and you're already stressing Monday and the rest of the week ahead of time on a consistent basis. Those are all signs of burnout. I use an example of a case that I heard about where someone was so burnout from their profession that they actually crashed their car to avoid going to work. They were that apathetic, burnout, depleted over going to work that they would rather crash their car than go to work. That's to the point where it gets to being serious. Burnout actually started, and you saw this in the video, in the helping profession with healthcare workers. And this has kind of trickled down to other professions as well, including education. So how do you avoid burnout if you're experiencing these signs? Well, prioritizing self-care, taking care of yourself, trying to shift your perspective about your employment, your job, reduction of exposure to job stressors. Are there ways that you can reduce stress at work? Some of the things that we talked about in the boundary section. And then seek out connections. Is there a mentor, somebody that can help guide you? Are there other professionals that you can connect with to maybe help alleviate your stress and your work, your frustrations or your concerns that you might have that might be leading you to feel like you're burnt out? Other ways to avoid burnout: work with a purpose. Many of us are educators. So what is your purpose? To educate children. Why are you there? To educate children. You do that to your best ability. Taking a job analysis. What's expected versus what isn't expected. That leads into an area of ambiguity and role diffusion. Ambiguity is what is my job? What is my role? What are my responsibilities? Role diffusion is if you are expected to do one thing, but you're asked to do something else on a consistent basis, there's a discrepancy there of what your role is and what you're actually doing, and they call that role diffusion. Helping others. I know it might seem like, well, I'm trying to take care of myself. How will I help others? Taking that into consideration is, if you are able to help others, it might help you feel better to help and give what you can without over stretching your boundaries and what you have time to do. Taking control of what you can control. There are things you can control, there's things that you cannot control. Try to take care of the things that you have in your locus of control, things that you can manage. This one is a little more difficult. Exercise regularly. That is part of avoiding burnout. It's easier said than done, but if you can fit in a little bit of exercise a few times a week, that does help with the cortisol levels and parts of your brain that do activate areas that help alleviate and reduce stress. And managing stress, leading into that through keeping a diary, journaling, breathing, meditation, positive thinking. All of those ways can help you manage stress. The video also talked about something that I did want to touch on. It's called pluralistic ignorance. And as you see here from the definition, pluralistic ignorance is the desire to conform to a larger group out of the false belief you're the only one that thinks another way. So in the video, like they said, if you're being asked, hey, how you doing? How's it going? I'm good, everything's good, whatever. But maybe you're not good. Maybe things aren't great. But because you're in a group of people or whatever, and everyone's like, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. You see this picture over here on the left, everybody says they're fine, but really everybody isn't fine. But you're conforming to the group beliefs and what they're saying, so that you feel like you're part of that group and everything's okay when maybe you're not. So that's something to take into consideration. I thought this was this is a telling image here, to maybe start addressing maybe you're not okay. And if you're not okay, to maybe seek some assistance with that, and start reframing and reshaping thoughts into ways that maybe you could feel like you are okay, rather than being in the I'm not fine but saying I'm okay category. So this is just a real quick application exercise. You can do this right from where you're at. You don't have to get up, but you think about 3 good things that happened to you today, and how did you bring them about? So if you are with other people, you can share that with somebody around you. And we call this a mindset shift, or a perspective shift. So 3 good things that happened to you, and how did you bring them about? So ways to do that. If you're by yourself, you can just pause the video and then reflect on those. You can write them down. If you're a journal, if you are someone that journals or reflects, you can write those down for your daily exercise or whatever it might be. 3 easy things that you can do right now in this moment. Smile. Pick your battles. What is one battle that you're not gonna fight it today, and know how to set your limit of what you're gonna pick a battle over. And then set boundaries at work and home. What can you say no to today? Doesn't have to be in a mean way. It doesn't have to be like, no, I'm never doing it again. But what can you put your foot down and say, no, I actually don't have time to do that today or tomorrow or sometime in the near future, so you don't overextend yourself. So are there any strategies that you currently use to avoid burnout that you haven't actually realized that you've been using? Take time, reflect on that. If you're with a partner, if somebody's around you, you can have that conversation. If you're by yourself, pause the video and just reflect on that. Are there any of these ways to avoid burnout that could be applicable to you? Do you see yourself using any of them? How could you use any of them? Think about and reflect on that, and have that brief conversation if you're with a partner. If not, think about that to yourself. And then it's balance. How do I balance it all? What are things in your life that you care about? How can you devote your time to them? How can you devote your attention and energy to these things that you do care about? But what are boundaries that you must put in place to support these areas? If you care about home, your emotions, your family, your job, what boundaries do you have to put in place to support those, to make sure that you can actually support them in a healthy manner? Also, appropriate boundaries depend on the setting. What you say with your friends may not be appropriate to say in front of your colleagues at work, or what you talk about with your family may not be what you want to talk about with your students, etc. So you need to think about those. What are the appropriate boundaries, and what are the settings? And don't feel guilty over setting personal boundaries. As we talked about earlier in the boundary setting, you have to have that balance. You have to be able to manage your emotions, your physical boundaries, your emotional boundaries, your time boundaries, etc. So if you don't set those boundaries, like we said, then people are going to take advantage of that and think that, well, they don't have boundaries, so I'm okay to do that. But setting boundaries is something you shouldn't feel guilty over doing, because you should be setting those boundaries for yourself and sticking to them. Make a schedule, stick to it. How do you do that? Our phones, our technology have tons of apps that you can keep things, calendars, make appointments, schedule them in, sticky notes if you're a physical sticky note person. I know computers have sticky notes, they're just still not the same. I'm an old school sticky note person. Ones that actually stick and don't fall off, like the inexpensive ones you usually find in the staff supply closet. The Post-it ones are typically the best. And then rewarding yourself for actually sticking to it. It doesn't have to be something of large monetary value. rewarding yourself with a treat at the end of the week. Or maybe if you get all your work done, you reward yourself to a new shirt or pair of pants or something, a new pair of shoes, or go out for an ice cream treat, or whatever it might be, going out to a movie on Friday night, or however you want to reward yourself. It doesn't have to be something big. It can just be something small, small token, something that intrinsically motivates you. Sleep, like I said earlier, optimal is 8 hours, but this may not be realistic. Just make sure you give yourself and your mind and your body time to rest, okay? Don't overextend yourself, because then if you don't get enough rest, your mind doesn't get enough rest, you don't have enough of that fuel in you to actually be rested, which is going to lead to depletion of energy and can lead to maybe burnout. Give yourself an hour of me time. Walk, exercise, read, watch TV, cook a meal, sun yourself. Doesn't have to be an hour a day. Maybe it's half an hour today, half an hour tomorrow, a couple hours a week, but just find things that you enjoy doing that you can give yourself time, me time, to actually do. Like I said, I know it's easier said than done, but if you schedule that in, try to figure it out, center yourself, do things that you enjoy, it'll help regulate some of those emotions and those feelings. And then as we're coming close to the end here, stop working at a designated time. Online educators actually logging off. Teachers in a physical classroom, if you're done at 4 o'clock, maybe say, I'm not staying past 4, I'm not staying past 4:30. Actually designate a time where you're stopped, you're done, you're going home, and you're actually logging off. Don't save extra work for the weekend if you're able to manage that time and fit some of those things in where you're able to do it during the week. Don't try to overload your weekend, because then you're actually not giving yourself a break in between. Only designate work time from a certain period of time on a Saturday or a Sunday. I'm only going to grade papers from 12 to 2 during this time, so you're not just extending that time that you're working into the weekend and all weekend long I'm grading papers or whatever. Or maybe you have to, but you only do it for a certain day or something like that. I'll only grade blank amount of assignments each day. Set mental, physical boundaries. Make friendships. Those people that you share things in common that don't take advantage of you and respect your boundaries. Find hobbies to de-stress. I like to go to concerts. That's the way I distress. So I go to concerts when I can, and I enjoy being there. And it just is a way that I distress and take breaks. If you can schedule some breaks throughout your day, if you have breaks, that's great. Try not to overexert yourself. And schedule do nothing breaks. If you teach virtually, take 15 minutes and just zone, or take those 15 minutes to scroll social media. If you have time in the classroom, downtime, just try to do nothing if it's feasible and it's acceptable. Find professional developments to refine your practice. We're always looking to refine the way that we teach and reflect upon our teaching strategies. So if you're able to find professional developments to refine the way that you do teach, do those. Celebrate your success and reflect and journal if you can journal. It's all about productivity, organizational skills, student engagement tools, mindset shifts, and a streamlined approach to lesson planning, paperwork, grading, finding that balance and what works for you, what works best for you, so that you're not just spinning your wheels and feel like you're getting nowhere in a hamster on a wheel, okay? This video at the end is, if you do have time to watch the video, go ahead and watch that. It is showing that there is a way to maintain work-life balance as a teacher. It is possible, it is attainable, and if you implement some of the strategies that we talked about today, it is able to be done, and there are better ways to do things. And if you can figure that out and find that balance, you probably are going to find yourself being more fulfilled in your profession. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know that it's a lot of information. It's a heavy topic, but committing to those boundaries, finding balance, taking time for you, knowing your worth, knowing you're valuable, what's important to you, your commitments, your boundaries, your expectations for yourself, your job, your family, work-life balance, etc. Those are all ways that you can find ways to avoid going down that road and being in a possible state of burnout. So I thank you for your time. Our why here at Canyon PD is to empower, educate, and inspire our community so they take action to fulfill their purpose and serve others. There is free PD that is available to you, and those are here on our YouTube channel. If you do subscribe to our YouTube channel, you can find some free PDs that are there. Also, you can scan the QR code for some K-12 educational professional development, and you can scan those and check those out. And at canyonpd.com, you will find PD on demand. Know that there are low-cost and individualized solutions that are available to you and your school. So if you want to check those out at your own time, go ahead and do so. And here are some references to some of the information used in the presentation. And I thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.